Hey there, welcome into the Hoosier Insider Podcast. I'm Griffin Epstein. It is our final podcast of the semester. We talked Indiana men's basketball a couple weeks ago. Now we are talking Indiana women's basketball to wrap up our second season of the Hoosier Insider Podcast. And today, Will Trubshaw joins me. He is the IUSTV beat reporter for Indiana women's basketball. Will, how you doing today?
Griffin, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Great to have you on again. I know we talked last year, midway through the season, Indiana was having one of their best seasons in program history. Obviously, we didn't get to see what they could do in the NCAA tournament, canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But expectations, they seem to be high this year. Is this team for real? Can they, maybe have the best season in the Indiana women's basketball history?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, it's going to be pretty hard to top the bar that was set last year. I mean, 24-8 overall, certainly destined for the NCAA tournament before things got shut down. I mean, that's a pretty high mark. But I think you got to like your chances if you're Terry Morin and the Hoosiers, only because they already have four starters returning in Allie Patberg, Grace Berger, Jalen Penn, and Alexa Golde. And you've got Mackenzie Holmes, who I think will probably slot in the starting rotation, but last year, a all freshman or all Big Ten freshman teamer. So I mean, it's a really talented group. I think the depth is good. I think to me, one of the most important things is that they've been there before. Like they have won 24 games before. They've got that experience. They know what it takes to get there. So I think it is quite possible to see them top the mark that they set last year. I guess the only caveat would be, what does the schedule look like? And they still haven't released it. So that's, they might not get to play 25 games this year. They might cap out at 25. In that case, I don't see them going 24-1 necessarily, or 25-0. But I mean, they've got a, performance-wise, I think they've got a very good chance to match, if not outperform how they performed last year, which is, again, that's remarkable.
Yeah, it's a little weird with the schedule, as with many things in the COVID pandemic. We saw today's Thursday when we're recording this, we saw the Indiana men's team release the Big Ten schedule yesterday. We saw their non-conference the day before. And actually finally have a game just right about an hour before we recorded this, as Indiana announced they're playing Kentucky, which will be a really good matchup, next month. I guess the assumption is, though, whenever the schedule comes out, and they're supposed to open their season in less than a week, so you'd hope soon, or maybe it's going to be a longer before they open their season at this point. But right. I guess one of the questions is, and it's the same question with the men's basketball team too. You're looking at probably a really tough schedule. How could that affect this team? If they're playing, as you said, maybe 20 of their 25 games are in the Big Ten.
Well, I think that's a challenge. Obviously, the Big Ten is such a deep league when it comes to basketball. And when you're playing a majority of your schedule against the Big Ten, it doesn't really leave you a lot of room for those sweetener games, the games that you can add to your resume and stuff to bulk it up. I mean, you look last year, one of the biggest wins for this women's team was against South Carolina, a team that finished the regular season number one in the AP poll. Their only loss to the Hoosiers. So that just given how the schedule is going to break down and stuff, it certainly decreases the chances of giving you games like that, giving you kind of a nice cushion to have going into the Big Ten. Because, I mean, you got to look back at it too. Last year, the Hoosiers, overall, they weren't bad in conference. They were 13-5 in conference. That was fourth overall. But I mean that, they might play two more games than that this year, and there's not as much wiggle room. You can't, if you go on a losing streak in conference now, if you hit that midseason lull, it's more likely to come during Big Ten play, and that could come back to bite you. So the scheduling is gonna pose quite a big challenge. Obviously the Hoosiers are picked to win the Big Ten, so I think a lot of pundits would say, well, it shouldn't be that big of an issue because they're probably the best team in the Big Ten. But it'll be interesting to see because, I mean, there are no freebies when it comes to Big Ten basketball.
Yeah, and the consistency was an issue last season. You just said a couple of disappointing losses they had last year, some blown leads in the Big Ten. But you also mentioned, that South Carolina victory. I mean, for our listeners that don't know, that was the only loss, as Will said. I mean, just to read it, the only loss South Carolina had all season long. It was to Indiana. It was a remarkable historic victory for the Hoosiers over a team that was favored to win the national championship. And you mentioned the expectations this year going in as Big Ten favorite. I mean, how does this team handle that expectations? This program has never before been the media favorite, pick first to win the Big Ten.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because they haven't been there in that respect. They haven't been this number one favorite before, but they've been there in that they've been at the front of the conference before. Just last year, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's a huge benefit for this team is the experience they have. They've kind of been up top. They couldn't take down Maryland, who was the best team in the Big Ten last year. That was one of the few hills they couldn't really climb last year. But I mean, they have that experience of playing tough teams, playing really well against them. I think for any team, when you become that number one team, you automatically have a target on your back, and that's what the Hoosiers are going to have to deal with this year. I think one of the most impressive things, though, at least for this team, listening to Terry Morin the other night in the virtual Hoosier Hysteria, she was just saying, we're not really focused on rankings and stuff. They're not really concerned about the preseason stuff. Their focus is on make it to the postseason. They want to clean up in regular season play. They want to take care of business, do well in the postseason. And, they want to make a deep March Madness run. That's their preliminary focus right now. So I think with that attitude, it makes it a lot easier to deal with the pressure. But I mean, I'm sure they know that the target is on their back this year. They've got 13 other teams on their heels, trying to make life incredibly difficult for them.
You mentioned Brenna Wise, the one major player that Indiana loses, graduated from last year, but Indiana actually gets a big addition, Nicole Cardano-Hillary, transferring in from George Mason. How do you expect her to affect this team? What kind of game is she bringing to IU?
Well, I mean, she's a scorer. She, leaving George Mason, she was the school's all-time leading scorer, over 3,000 points. I mean, you just look at it last year. In 30 games, she put up 18.3 points a game, including she had a game 41 points. I mean, she's a talented scorer. She can fill it up. That 18.3 points a game, that outpaces any of the other Hoosiers on the roster last year, including Ali Patberg. Ali Patberg only had about 15 points a game. So, I mean, that's a huge addition right there. It's another guard who can step in and fill in the role for Patberg when she goes to the bench, because that was one of the few issues for the Hoosiers last year. Is you had obviously Jalen Penn and Grace Berger, but none of them they didn't really have the trust of Terry Morin as a ball handler that Ali Patberg did, and that kind of led to Ali Patberg having to play some heavy minutes, and that goes too for the bench. The Hoosiers have a lot of depth at the guard position on the bench. But Terry Morin was a little reluctant to use it sometimes. So I think adding Nicole Cardano-Hillary certainly helps with that. The shooting percentages, not necessarily the best, but again, she fills it up. She finds ways to score, and I think that's a valuable asset to have for the team. The only question really surrounding her right now is, does she get cleared to play? Right now, she's waiting on that, the clearance from the NCAA, and that could change the picture for the Hoosiers. If she gets to play this year, that's a big rotation piece. And then you probably have to redshirt. You're definitely going to redshirt one of your incoming freshmen. The question is, who do you redshirt then? If she's not cleared, then, I might almost think that Terry Morin likes that, because once Ali Patberg leaves after this season, then you have someone who fills in right away in Nicole Cardano-Hillary, someone who's gotten like Patberg did a couple years ago, sitting behind Tyra Buss. Now she gets to sit for a year behind Patberg, kind of learn the system, work it out in practice, and then she slots in right away next year. But I think either way it works. I mean, it's a really solid pickup for the Hoosiers. Someone who's on the same watch lists as Ali Patberg on the Nancy Lieberman Award watch list. So talented guard, can't go wrong. Guard play is important, especially in this day and age.
Interesting point you bring up about redshirting her. Obviously a talented player. She was Atlantic 10 Rookie of the Year her freshman year in 2018, Atlantic 10 Player of the Year in 2019. And then you mentioned it right before her career ended, becoming the all-time leading scorer in not even full 3 seasons with George Mason. So quite a scorer, and maybe she plays, maybe she doesn't this year. But to me, it felt like the biggest struggle for Indiana last year was scoring consistently, and especially 3-point shooting. They weren't able to get it. Especially they just go cold. Thinking UCLA in the first quarter, they had 4 points against Maryland in the third quarter in the Big Ten semifinals. They went cold. What is Terry Morin said about improving that? What do you think needs to change this year so you don't have these long cold spouts that could cost the team a game?
Well, it's hard to put a finger on it, because it's one thing if you're not spacing the floor well and you're not getting open shots. That can affect things a lot. But I wouldn't really say that was the issue for the Hoosiers last year, because they had a very strong inside game. They're very good at taking it to the basket. And I mean, you look at someone like Mackenzie Holmes, who was phenomenal in the post last year. You add someone like Danielle Patterson, who can play in the post. She can stretch it outside now. I mean, so I don't know if the issue was so much floor spacing as it is, sometimes they struggle to hit shots. I mean, Jalen Penn is a streaky shooter. That's just kind of her game. I think something that could help, Ali Patberg taking more shots. That's something that Terry Morin has emphasized all year. She really wants Ali Patberg to take charge of games, because Ali Patberg, at times, offensively, she can be passive. She is a point guard, and at times she plays like a pass-first point guard, which is not a bad thing. But she's got good amount of talent for scoring. She shot mid to high 30s from 3-point range when she did shoot it. But I think the emphasis would be getting her to shoot more. Again, I think you like Danielle Patterson. She's versatile. She could stretch it out a little bit. Grace Berger, she improved on the mid-range from her freshman to sophomore season last year. I think if she can stretch that out even more into the 3-point game, I think that helps a lot. And, like I said, even Mackenzie Holmes, she was good in the paint last year. Maybe, in the offseason, if she worked on her outside shot at all, not even 3-point necessarily, but kind of that mid-range game, I think that could be big for the team too. So I think it's just developing players more, and then, working with what you have. Because, again, Ali Patberg is a good shooter. Jalen Penn, when she gets hot, I mean, she lights out. She can take over games with her 3-point shooting. And that's what the Hoosiers are going to need this year. Is they need that to be consistent, of course. And there are question marks with Jalen Penn just because she's coming off plantar fasciitis surgery. So she's got, she's not at 100% yet. It's getting in the ballpark. She's been working out with the team for the last month or so as they've done live in-person practices. But, I mean, they're going to need her to be at full strength if they want to get that full complement of strong shooting.
I mean, man, you mentioned Mackenzie Holmes. Imagine if she could make some 3-pointers. That would be quite something to defend.
That would be incredible, because, I mean, you just think of it. She was so good last year at running the floor and getting in the paint and finishing. I mean, she had, coming in as a freshman, she had some of the best footwork I've seen of a big in the Big Ten, certainly on IU. I mean, she was a league ahead of most of her low post teammates. She's just very nimble-footed. I don't want to draw too many comparisons, but it kind of reminded me almost of a Frank Kaminsky in the men's league, just how sure-footed he was working in the post. And Mackenzie Holmes certainly had that. So if you have that skill and then you can add in an outside shot, I mean, that's scary. That's a deadly weapon that Terry Morin and her staff would have on their hands.
I love the reference to Frank Kaminsky. I don't know why. The other day I was thinking of him. One of my favorite all-time Big Ten players Hasn't done much in the NBA. He was awesome at Wisconsin. I do, speaking of great players, though, want to talk a little bit more about Ali Papperg. Sure. Probably in her last season with Indiana, everyone gets another year of eligibility, so maybe she could play what would be a 7th season of college eligibility next year.
Yeah,
possible. But what just makes her a special player and the leader of this team? What the reason that she's on all these national watch lists going into the season?
Well, I mean, I think the talent is obvious. Like I mentioned, she's a pass-first point guard, but she still put up those 15 points a game last year. And I've got the stats up here. You can look at her numbers. I mean, she passes well. She's a good defender. She got such a well-rounded game. She's targeted. I've seen some mock projections that she might go in the second round of the WNBA draft. Of course, it's 3 rounds for the WNBA draft. So, I mean, the WNBA teams see her value too, and it's just she can play the point guard position well, and she shoots it efficiently. Would her numbers change if she shot more? Yeah, I'm sure she would miss more shots, but I think she's a good enough player that, if she turns her offensive game up another level, it only serves to benefit the team. I mean, she is the catalyst for the entire Hoosier offense as it stands. And I think, teams recognize that. They see just how talented of a guard she is. I mean, really, she was the difference maker last year for the Hoosiers. She elevates the rest of that team up and up, and it shows. And I think she's definitely getting the credit that she has due coming to her just for how she plays.
I'm going to make you make a prediction a little bit earlier in the podcast than you probably expected, but she wasn't picked as Big Ten preseason player of the year. Does she win that award?
That's putting me on the spot.
Started to get it spicy early.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. She's on the Lieberman Award watch list. She's on the Naismith Award watch list. And I would be hard pressed to say if you're on those watch lists that you're not going to get at least a crack at the Big Ten Player of the Year. Obviously, though, like I said at the beginning, the Big Ten is deep. I mean, you look at Northwestern; they were a threat last year. Maryland, obviously, I mean, there are a lot of really talented teams that gave the Hoosiers fits last year. Players could start from there, but I think if Ali Papperg helps guide this team to first place in the Big Ten, if they kind of meet those thresholds that have kind of been set out here in the preseason, if they continue to succeed, if they move up in the AP poll, maybe even crack the top 10, I'm going to assume that most of that is a result of the play of Ali Papperg, and I think in that case, you probably have to give her the award. So I don't want to commit to anything. I'll say it's very possible that she becomes the Big Ten Player of the Year this year.
No hot takes from Will, but I understand so much uncertainty this year. We don't know what's going to happen. So, you mentioned the Big Ten a little bit. Last year, Maryland, I think, was clearly the cream of the crop of the league. It was very deep after that. Maryland loses some pieces. They're still ranked number 12 in the AP poll. Indiana 16. Who are you expecting as well to be at the top of the Big Ten, be Indiana's chief competitors for that Big Ten crown?
Again, I really do think Northwestern is going to be up there. I think just what they showed last year with Coach McEwen, they're just a really talented team, really well-coached team. I think having a well-coached team says a lot. I mean, you look at IU with Terry Moore and Maryland, their head coach's name escapes me right now, but I mean, she's phenomenal. Led the team to a Big Ten title. I personally, I think that last year that Maryland team was a Final Four team. And like you said, they lose some pieces. So, I mean, I think they're a threat. I think Iowa, probably not as big a threat as they were last year. They lost Kathleen Doyle to the WNBA. And she was, in a lot of ways, like their Ali Papperg. I mean, she was kind of the facilitator. She made things happen for that Iowa team. So not having her, I think that's going to be a big blow. But I mean, you look at it, it's a deep league, but I think IU really they kind of have the upper hand on a lot of those other teams. They handled Rutgers in the Big Ten tournament and the regular season last year. Nebraska is not much of a threat. Minnesota, they gave IU some trouble last year. I'll give you that. But I think IU has got a pretty good team. I think the main threats, it's going to be like last year. It's the big three of IU, Maryland, and Northwestern.
It seems like this year there isn't really, maybe Maryland was a Final Four team. There isn't really maybe a Final Four team this year in the Big Ten. It's just maybe not as strong at the top as, say, a Pac-12 or an ACC.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you look at those conferences; those are the powerhouse conferences. You've got Oregon. They lose. I mean, you think about this year; there are a lot of stars that have migrated from the college ranks here to the WNBA. I mean, Sabrina Ionescu from Oregon. What happens to Oregon now? Are they still that powerhouse that everyone thinks of? Probably, but they might not be. They might not be national championship contenders without Sabrina Ionescu. I still think. Obviously the Pac-12 is strong. I think you can even look at the SEC. You got South Carolina. They were like we said, one loss last year, and I see no reason why that's gonna. They might lose a couple more games this year, but I don't think they're fall to the bottom of the SEC now. I mean, I think there's a lot of really talented conferences. Could a team make a run from the Big Ten, get hot, and go all the way? Yeah, it's totally possible. I could certainly see IU or Maryland being one of those teams. It depends on how the season unfolds. Because all we have right now is the preseason projections too. Teams play well in the regular season, they move up the rankings too. So we could see a Big Ten team, but I mean, I would be inclined to see some of the traditional powers back in the Final Four again just this year. That's kind of the way this year has felt. It's like the good teams just float to the top, I guess.
It has been in women's basketball in the past 10 years, a definite pecking order of 4 or 5 programs nationally that have been superior to almost everyone else. It's felt like, and in connection to that, I mean, Indiana's obviously not at that level, but we've seen Terry Moore now in her 6th year, they still haven't made a Sweet 16, but, it's been strange, obviously, in the last year. Is this a program? There's a lot of seniors on this team, Pat Berg, and a lot of the players are going to be leaving at the end of the year or in the next 2 years. Is this something that Terry Moore can sustain and, keep Indiana at the top of the Big Ten and have Indiana as a team that can make a run into the Sweet 16 and Elite 8?
Well, that's a good question. That comes obviously down a lot to recruiting and stuff. And, this year the Hoosiers bring in 2 freshmen, Chloe Moore McNeil and Keandra Brown, 2 very talented players. And again, they also draw in Nicole Cardano Hillary. So, I mean, I think that's how you sustain a program is you bring in talented freshmen and graduate players and stuff. I think Terry Moore has done a good job with it. I mean, that's what she did with Brenna Wise and Allie Patrick. They were transfers. She brought them in, and they were the core of this team for 2 years. So I think looking at it from that respect, Terry Moore knows what she's doing in terms of sustaining a program. Obviously, losing a player like Allie Piper, that's going to be a big blow for this team. I think seeing just what players do these next couple seasons, that it'll certainly change the complexion of the team. But I mean, for me, it comes down to the future, the prospects that the Hoosiers are bringing. The class of 2021 coming in for the Hoosiers. They've got a couple of international players coming in who are supposed to be stars. So you look at it. Maybe there's a drop off for a season as the young players kind of get acclimated and stuff. But I mean, they're going to get to learn these next couple of years under the likes of Allie Piper and Jalen Penn. And then next year, You're going to have Grace Berger, who's been training, she's kind of been the understudy to a degree for Allie Patberg. You've got Mackenzie Holmes as a big down low. She's only a sophomore. So I guess to answer your question, I think the team will be okay because I think they've got a good ratio of the veteran players who are stars, but also you've got young players who have kind of broken through and shown we can play too. We can be big parts of this team. And I think if you keep creating that consistent funnel of young players who are talented and get the occasional transfer, it's going to work out well for your team. It depends too, their performance will depend too on how other Big Ten teams are able to recruit and stuff. But I think at least the short term and maybe a little bit the long term prospects for this IU team are pretty good. I think they're in decent shape to continue contending for a few years.
We've talked about Patberg. Time for, I guess, more predictions for you. Who is a player that we're not talking about as much you think might have a breakout season? I think it was kind of Grace Berger kind of came out of nowhere last year for Indiana and became a key player in their starting five that could get key buckets. Who maybe is that player you think for Indiana this year?
I think we're going to get a lot of Danielle Patterson. She transferred from Notre Dame like Allie Patberg was. And again, Terry Moran has talked about using her as kind of a 3 or a 4. But what that signals is, she's a very talented basketball player. She was a McDonald's All-American, I believe. She can shoot the ball, but she can play it in the post well. So, I said earlier on that I think Kenzie Holmes could be that player that replaces Brenna Wise in the starting 5. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see Danielle Patterson get a shot too. She's a very good basketball player. She's tall. And that's something the Hoosiers need is they need that height down low. But she can play multiple positions too. I think, just in general in this era of basketball, positionless basketball is kind of more or less the norm. So having a player who can guard and play multiple positions like Danielle Patterson can, I think that's going to be big. And I think if she can add some scoring too, again, if Cardano Hillary doesn't get cleared right away, we could see Danielle Patterson come in and add the offense that might have been added for Cardano Hillary. So I think definitely she's the player to keep an eye on for this Hoosiers team.
Well, I'm going to ask you the big questions now. We'll start with the Big Ten. Indiana is the favorite. It has been a long time in Bloomington since we've seen the women's basketball team raise the Big Ten championship trophy. Do they win the regular season title this year in the Big Ten?
I think they do. I think they are, again, they've got a big enough portion of the returning core. We talked about the Marylands and the Northwesterns. They're returning some players, but they dropped in the rankings. IU, compared to last year, they've moved up in the preseason rankings. And again, Terry Moran would tell you, preseason rankings don't mean a thing. And the saying goes, don't mean a thing without the ring. But I think this is a team that just the depth they have and the returners that they have coming off the bench, they are very much poised to win the Big Ten. I really think they can pull it off.
One last question for you, Will. So much is up in the air. We're still talking. We don't know the schedule. It sounds like the NCAA tournament for both the men's and women's is going to be played in one location, which unfortunate for the Hoosiers in a year where they very likely for the first time in program history get to host some NCAA tournament games at home. And, they'd probably set attendance records at Assembly Hall. But either way, ESPN put out their Big Ten preview for women's basketball and said Indiana, they think, is the most likely team to make a run to the Final Four out of the Big Ten. Do you agree with it? What is the ceiling for this team? Is it Sweet 16? Is it Final Four? Is it national championship, or is that crazy?
Well, national championship, that might be a stretch. That's the goal for the team. Obviously, I'm sure if you ask any one of the players, they say we're competing for a national championship right now. That's where you have to set the bar for yourself. You can't say, well, we'd be okay with a round of 64 berth. No, you always have to set the bar high, especially when you've got the kind of team that the Hoosiers have. Is a Final Four run unrealistic? Not necessarily. Like I said, if the cards fall right, if you start getting hot at the right time, as long as you stay healthy and you get hot at the right time, anything can happen. If you get a favorable draw in that NCAA tournament, I mean, there's no reason you can't make a deep run. It's hard to say because obviously we didn't get to see them play in the tournament last year. I really do feel like last year, had we gotten to see them play in March Madness, it would have been a good barometer for what we might get out of this team now, because they would have another year of experience under their belt and without a doubt the desire to be like, we need to get back to where we were and even better. I got to say, like I said, I think they can win the Big Ten. They'll probably be the Big Ten representative that I think can go the farthest, but I would cap them out at about Elite Eight. I don't know if Final Four is in the cards necessarily, but again, things can change.
Well, a lot of things changing. Not really relevant, but I signed my lease for my apartment for the next year, which ends in 2022. And I was like, what in the world will the world look like in 2022? But maybe Indiana women's basketball will be a Final Four team. Who knows?
Wouldn't that be something, huh? I would be pretty cool to see.
Indiana football, Indiana women's basketball could be a historic year in Indiana sports. We will see. Will, great insight today. Appreciate you coming on. Best of luck with your coverage, and hope you have a great Thanksgiving that's coming up next week.
Hey, Griffin, thanks. Same to you. Safe travels home, and a happy Thanksgiving. And yeah, we'll see how the season unfolds from here, starting soon.
Should be a fun women's basketball team. Was an absolute blast to watch last year, and I don't think it's going to be anything but the same this year. That will do it for our Hoosier Insider podcast for this week and for this semester. I want to thank everyone, all our guests that have come on over the course of this semester. We've had coaches, Coach Escobedo, Coach Aird, Coach Van Bennekom, some great guests ranging from Will Trubshaw to DJ Fessler, Matt Cohen, and Tyler Toshman. It's been a weird semester, but it's been great to continue doing the podcast and continue doing it over video form. The Hoosier Insider Podcast hopes to return next semester. I will not be hosting it, but we hope to have a new host and continue bringing IU sports content to you over multiple platforms on video. So as always, you can check out all of our podcasts in audio form, wherever you get your podcasts, and all of our podcasts this semester in video form as well on the IU Sports Media YouTube page. That's going to do it today for Hoosier Insider Podcast. For Will Trubshaw, I'm Griffin Epstein. Have a great Thanksgiving. Stay safe and stay sane.